Why hadn't Sauron known of the Shire? The Nazgul rode for weeks. Across the Anduin Valley, through the passes of the misty mountains, into lands they had not touched in an age. 9 wraiths, once great kings, sorcerers, and warriors, now the most terrifying instruments of will in all of Middle-earth. Welcome to the Elven perspective. And they were lost. They had a name, wrested from a broken creature under the shadow of Barad-dûr. They had a word, Shire, pulled from what remained of a mind that had once been a hobbit. But a name is not a map, and so they rode into the northwest of the world, half blind, questioning every shadow, every farmstead, every frightened traveller on the road. And still they could not find it, until at last one of the 9 set foot in the Shire. That is how close it was. That is how thin the thread. Most who ponder this moment ask the wrong thing entirely. They ask, how did the Shire stay hidden? The question that should keep you awake is different. How does a land nearly 50,000 square kilometers in size, a land through which dwarves and men and even wizards had passed, remain utterly invisible to the most powerful darkness in the world? It is, in truth, 3 answers, woven together like threads in a tapestry so old its origins have been forgotten. The misty mountains do not merely divide Middle-earth geographically, they divide it spiritually. Information does not cross those peaks easily. People do not. Languages drift apart. Histories diverge. Treebeard, ancient beyond reckoning, who had walked beneath living canopies when the world itself was still finding its shape, who remembered forests that no map has ever named, had never heard of the Shire. Whether Smaug or the trolls knew of it, Tolkien does not say, but that silence is itself meaningful. Hobbits were a people who had not passed into the records of great history, and that invisibility was, perhaps, their oldest protection. The Shire was a backwater, not merely in the eyes of men and kings, but in the great weaving of events itself. Hobbits did not seek power. They did not go to war with their neighbours. They did not build towers or forge rings or send ambassadors to distant courts. They stayed. They ate. They lit their hearth fires and pulled their curtains against the dark. And the dark never noticed them. But the dark, eventually, heard a whisper. There was a creature who had once carried the ring, who had spent centuries beneath the misty mountains with it, been shaped by it, been hollowed by it, and who, when it was taken from him, was consumed by a longing darker than grief. It was not Bilbo's trail he was following, so much as the pull of the ring itself, that old, insistent hunger dragging him forward. He crossed the marshes of the Gladden Fields, drifted south, and walked directly into Sauron's reach. He was captured. He was made to speak. It was Gandalf who traced Bilbo's true path, to the lonely mountain, through Mirkwood, and back again, piecing it together over years, thread by thread. And Sauron learned only what Gollum could give him, a name and a word, Baggins, the Shire. A name alone, however, is not a map. And so the 9 were sent out into a world they could not read. But silence alone is not enough to stop the eye. For generations beyond counting, the Dunedain, the Rangers of the North, the remnant of a kingdom that had crumbled and been forgotten, walked the wild lands in secret, grey cloaks, no banners, no names spoken in polite company. They were the inheritance of Arnor, the last duty of a broken people, and they took that duty seriously in ways that would have shamed many a glittering court. If any creature of darkness wandered too close to the Shire, it was dealt with quietly. If any spy of Sauron found the Western Road, it did not return to make its report. The Rangers asked for no recognition. They received none. Even the hobbits they protected called them strangers and felt vaguely uneasy in their presence. And yet, even the eye of Mordor has its own blindnesses. There was another will at work in the West, not a servant of the Dark Lord, but a rival of him, a mind that desired the ring for itself, and who quietly, methodically, severed the threads of Sauron's Western intelligence before they could reach their mark. The Shire was protected not only by those who loved it, but by one who had forgotten how to love anything at all. None of Sauron's network of eyes ever reached the Shire and lived to describe what they found. And those who came closest were held back at a ford of stones. The Rangers held Sarn Ford against the 9, outnumbered, outmatched, and ultimately scattered. But the holding of that crossing stretched the road to the Shire just a little longer. One of the 9 entered Hobbiton on the 23rd of September, the very day Frodo left. History sometimes is written in hours, and yet there is a third layer, one that no map can show. Gandalf, who saw more of Middle-earth than perhaps any other living being, had a particular and inexplicable tenderness for hobbits. Not merely affection, fascination. He visited the Shire far more often than its obscurity could ever justify. He watched them with the quiet attention of someone who has glimpsed something others have missed entirely. He hinted once that there was something in hobbits that others had walked past without seeing. He did not name a place, he named a people. And I do not think that was carelessness. Tolkien, like Gandalf, knew when to leave a door ajar rather than throw it open. Perhaps what Gandalf sensed was simply this: hobbits are extraordinarily difficult to corrupt. The ring requires a soul that reaches for dominion, and hobbits, in their stubborn, unhurried, deeply physical love of small things, simply do not reach. Perhaps that resistance, that profound, almost structural incapacity for dark ambition, is itself the thing Gandalf could not quite name. Perhaps the two things are not separate at all. Tolkien left that question open. So shall we. The ring lay in the Shire for nearly 80 years, and nothing stirred. 60 beneath Bilbo's roof, 17 more beneath Frodo's. 77 years of silence, a darkness that feeds on ambition, cannot find purchase in a people who want nothing more than a warm hearth and a second helping. And here is where history reveals its most bitter joke. The Shire exists because of Sauron. When he first returned from defeat and chose Dol Guldur as his refuge, that choice was not accidental. the Gladden Fields, where the ring slipped silently from the finger of a king still living, still fleeing, and dissolved into the cold current of the Anduin. Isildur was alive when it left him. The ring had simply decided. The arrows came after. He settled as close to his lost treasure as a half-blind thing could feel its way toward. He was reaching, without knowing he was reaching, but his shadow reached further than his intent. When that darkness crept across the vales of Anduin in the year 1050 of the Third Age, the small, quiet, river-loving folk who lived in that valley grew afraid. They moved westward, slowly, over generations, and in the year 1601 of the Third Age, they settled in a land they called home, the Shire. If Sauron had never risen, if the shadow had never fallen over the Anduin, the hobbits would never have walked west, the Shire would never have existed, and the ring would never have come to rest in a hobbit's pocket in a cave beneath the misty mountains. The ring did not choose Bilbo, or so the evidence suggests. The ring had betrayed Gollum, abandoned him, to find its way back to Sauron. That was its design. That was its will. But in that darkness beneath the mountains, something else was at work. Something beyond any design of the ring's maker. Gandalf named it at the Council of Elrond. It was meant to be found, not by Sauron, not by the ring's own dark cunning, but by a frightened and entirely ordinary hobbit whose hand fell upon cold metal in the dark. Frodo carried it not because of his bloodline, but because of who he was. That is what Tolkien called chance. That is what Gandalf, in the halls of Rivendell, dared to call something more. A silent intervention, beyond the ring's will, beyond any maker's calculation. The Dark Lord spent an age searching for the ring. In every shadow, every ruin, every river he could reach. He never thought to look at the land his own fear had created. And that silence, that invisible, unassuming pipe smoke silence, was the only thing standing between his victory